Sandy Kelsey. I'm Carter's uncle. Why am I here? I'm not a Reservoir neighbor, but my sister passed away in 2010, and her kids were younger then, and she put the property in a trust, and I'm the trustee, and I got, so that's fun, and in 2018, I got a notice from the state of New Hampshire, from Jim Weber's division, and he's going to speak later, telling us that we've got a letter of deficiency, and said that we had to do some improvements to the dam. And not having owned a dam before, I got hold of my old college classmate, Tom Burak, who's fiddling with his computer, and said, "Hey Tom, help me out here with this state mandated letter of deficiency. What do I need to do?" So Tom, who was at one point in time the director of the Bureau of Environmental Services in New Hampshire. Is that right?
Close enough.
Close enough, okay. At one time, he was the head honcho for the whole thing, but now he's in private practice, and he has helped the trust, myself and Carter, shepherd us through what we have to do, what the state is mandating us to do, what our options are, and we've come to a point where we felt it was necessary to share this with everybody who, along with us, love Reservoir Pond and want to keep it as it is. And so, without any further ado, we've involved everybody pretty much to try to get together and clean up around the dam and do some of the state mandated improvements. So that's why I recognize a lot of you here. Buff McLowry, Tim Beck, Tim Caldwell have been especially helpful because they've helped think of some further things that the community might do as one. So I'm going to turn this over to Buff, who will then introduce other folks along the way. At any point in time, if you have any questions about any of this, you can always email me. You've had emails from me. The people I didn't have emails from, I do now. We are videotaping this so that folks that aren't here can see it, and if you ever want to review it, there's a point that you didn't quite understand, we will figure out a way of making that available to everybody. Bob.
So I thought I would start a little bit of history that I know of, and then everybody can kind of fill in some of the pieces that either get off course or is not, something you've heard. But the pond, it's a glacial pond. It was originally in the 1800s called Smart's Pond after Smart's Mountain. And the lore goes that Smart's was a trader and traded with the Native Americans and didn't always come out on the right side of what they thought was fair. And so they chased him up on the mountain and came back down and cut a hole in the ice and pushed him inside the pond. So he got his name on the mountain and he got his name on the pond. And I took this couple of pictures off an 1860 map that I have at home of Grafton County. And it shows Smart's Pond, and it's about maybe 2/3 of what it is now inside. So
I hear you fine, but you're so far away. I wonder if everybody'd be okay if you took your mask off for the speaker part of it.
I'm fine.
So anyway, so Smart's Pond had a couple of sawmills, and in the 1800s or so, when they were clearing all that land up there and turning it into sheep pasture, there was a big sawmill on the western shore somewhere between Bars and Tammy's house, as I understand. And there were farms up there and everything else. And then along came the shakers in the end of the 1800s, and they decided to turn it into a reservoir for farming that they had down the valley, in the Mascoma Valley. And so they raised the level of the water there, and that's what we presently are dealing with, is the dam. It's an old crib and stone dam. It's got a pretty good swale in it right now because a lot of the cribbing has rotted out over the years, but it stood the test of time pretty well for being, whatever, 120 or so years. By the maps that you see in the early 1900s, it's all of a sudden been renamed Reservoir Pond instead of Smarts Pond. And it's a different configuration and larger in size. Right now, I just pulled this off of the state website, but it has the pond now at 159 acres with a maximum depth of about 40 feet. And so we've all kind of, lived around the pond and enjoyed the pond, and I think it's a great mixture of summer and winter residents there. And we've done a lot of the work, as Sandy said, that needed to be done as far as the state efficiency. And I think we ought to just sort of get the whole picture from the state's perspective, because this whole meeting is about choices and future of what we want to do. There actually are a lot of choices. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Jim Weber. He's from DES, the Department of Environmental Services, and the Dam Division, and he's been up there on several occasions, and we've met him up there and investigated the dam, and some of the issues that are there with the dam, as far as leaking and brush and trees and all the other things that we've had to deal with. And so after he gets his handout here, which is a little short overview, we'll get the latest skinny on what Jim feels needs are some of the options.
All right, I can probably be loud enough, I'll go ahead and do this anyway. So my name is Jim Weber. I'm a dam safety engineer for the State of New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services. More frequently, I'm called a dam engineer. Get a chuckle out there somewhere, come on.
I'll laugh for you, Jim.
Oh, okay, you're moving.
There you go.
So I just did a quick two-page just a little bit of information about the dam, a little bit of history. So I'll actually go in, start with the history part here, using the photos here, which are on the backside as well. Interesting note is when this dam was newer, this was a 1934 photo, but this is probably resembles what it did upon its completion originally. You see this stone right here? You see that stone over there? That's the same stone. It happens to be very nicely unique. So the dam used to be several feet higher than its current configuration. All of those stones are not down at the toe of the dam. So it doesn't appear to have toppled over, fallen off, gotten overtopped so that it would be, some of those things might have eroded away. It appears at some point it was intentionally, the top of the dam was lowered. Any of you who have been out there also realize that on each end of the dam, the stonework goes up higher than it does across the central portion of the dam. So, it's changed. Another thing that's not quite as obvious, we'll go ahead and talk about here. Can you scroll up the time? This is probably the best photo. This is what I said back to you. You'll notice the dam downstream wall isn't a straight line. It was very, very likely built in a straight line. The center portion, which is the tallest portion, has bulged out over time due to water pressure. It could be that they saw that back whenever they took the top portions of the dam off. It could be that that's always been there, but it's there. It could be that things have reached a stability, we don't know. We have a lot of, I'll call them a double stone wall dike dams like the Shakers built. A lot of them were built by other people besides just the Shakers too. They were a vertical upstream stone wall, stacked stone wall, and a vertical downstream stacked stone wall with fill, rocks, timbers around the spillway, oftentimes so they could get detailed support in there. They weren't doing fine stonework, they were just using rubble stone. We have a lot of these dams still holding back water, just like this one in New Hampshire. We also have a few of them that have failed. And that movement out is an indication that there, certainly at least historically, has been stress on this dam. There may still be stress on the dam. So, this particular information, this doesn't show the curve quite as well, but it still does show it. We have been inspecting this dam every 6 years for quite a long time. And we have had some previous letter deficiencies in the past, more focused on brush and tree removal and some other paperwork items. But as we got a better view, and I've worked with this for several inspections like now. When I first started looking out here, none of this clearing had been done. You couldn't see anything at the bottom of the dam. You really couldn't get this view down the downstream to see just how out of linear it was. So, working with Buffs and Neighbors and Carter and all, they have gotten, and I know a lot of you probably, they've gotten this cleared out. So we've come back and done some more inspections. And that's really when it became so apparent that that bulge was out there, and it was as large as it was. For those of you familiar with the dam, that also is where the spillway is. The spillway is inset into the dam, so that means that the actual stone and earth section holding back water in the center portion of that dam is much thinner than the rest of the dam. So it's an obvious weak point. So once we got all that and working through everything, we issued a new letter of deficiency on this dam, asking the owners to do several things. A lot of them was the brush and tree clearing, which has been done very well. We need to have a survey to really get a good idea of what was out there. That was done. They hired an engineering consultant to come out and have a detailed look at the dam. This is a gentleman named Eric Teal who has a lot of history of working on old dams in New Hampshire. So he was a very good choice. He came out, he looked at this, he had his engineering staff do some hydrology and hydraulic modeling to see how this dam complies with the dam safety rules that we have for discharge capacity in New Hampshire. Because there had been some question on whether it would meet that. I know the Buff has either seen it overtopping or seen it close to overtopping at least once historically. So we did all those evaluations were done. And the end result of the engineering analysis was that if we brought everything up to a level basically with this downstream stone wall all the way across, and we did some reinforcing work and grouting around the spillway, and did some work down in the stone culvert coming out, because there's a lot of rotted timbers under there, that the dam could probably then be okay for a while. Part of that was monitoring. You see, we actually have some marks here. Certain stones with survey equipment periodically to see if those stones are continuing to move or whether they're relatively static now. If they're relatively static, then that's a good thing. If they're continuing to move, then that's looking at potentially a much larger issue with the dam. The state of New Hampshire is involved with dams because of public safety. This dam is a low hazard dam for us because of the downstream road. If this dam were to fail, either under just a normal day or under a storm event, the downstream road is going to pretty much be bye-bye. Okay? So that's the reason for the low hazard classification. In a low hazard dam, it has to discharge a 50-year storm event with 1 foot of freeboard, which in its current configuration, it doesn't. But once again, if it's modified and raised up, it will.
Jim, could you explain what you mean by 1 foot of freeboarding? Could you also
Yeah,
talk
sure.
about what the options are that dam owners would have when there are deficiencies like this?
So freeboard is the distance from the top of the water to the top of the dam. So under a normal event, the water's at the spillway entrance. During a storm event, which was modeled, it's going to come up. And whatever the maximum elevation it comes up to, there has to be 1 foot of elevation difference between that and the top of the dam. Okay, does that make sense? Questions about that? If your dam doesn't meet discharge capacity requirements, you have several options. One option is to modify the dams in the spillways so that it has that. Another option is to design the be safe for having water flowing over the top of it or overtopping. And then the final one is always to remove the dam. DES does not tell a dam owner which one to choose. That's entirely up to the owner, but they have to do one of those things so that they're in compliance with the rules. Obviously, if the dam is removed, it's not a dam, it's not jurisdictional. We're gone. So, at least for the initial work, they were kind of looking at that reconstruction, just trying to get an idea of what the options were, and then maybe what the cost associated might be. And so, we're here now to try to explain all this all to you so that you can understand that obviously you all benefit from this great pond, a great part of the state. But dams, just like your car, they don't last forever. You have to do maintenance on them, you have to do upkeep, you have routine maintenance, and then you have more long-term maintenance. So even the routine maintenance had kind of fallen by the wayside here. As many of you know, this was covered in brush and trees not that long ago, including on top of the dam itself. Those are big no-nos for a dam because they can topple over and take that stonework with them and part of the dam or the dam. The roots can penetrate through the dam down to the pond, which can then create a short circuit for water to flow through the dam. Because instead of having to go through the full width, now maybe you only have to go through half the width because you can travel along the roots. So all those things are important. So once again, there's been a lot of work done currently by the owner to get to where they're at here. But now is the bigger challenge. And that is going to be to figure out how to reconstruct the dam, or the potential then, that's not a viable alternative, to look at the other options. In this case, removal is really the only other option. This dam really isn't stable by any modern engineering design standard. And if you put flowing water over the top of it, it's not going to be stable without doing significant work, like basically building a whole new dam over the top of it. So in this case, I think it's safe to kick that option out. So we're really looking at the reconstruction to meet our rules, and the removal. We're kind of at a middle ground too, though, because we're looking at right now, the proposed reconstruction is not addressing this bulge except to observe it. Once again, if it's stable, then maybe that's all that needs to be done in the future is just to observe it. If it's showing not stable, then that's a whole different scope of work that no one's fully evaluated at this point. None of the work that's currently being proposed would really have any negative financial or otherwise impact to that greater scope if it had to happen, which hopefully it does not have to happen. All right, so now we'll see how far astray I've gone. We talked a little bit earlier, we talked about the letter of deficiency we issued. Once again, most of the things have been worked on. There is a permit for reconstruction to meet our rules. Currently, it has been issued by DES. The letter of deficiency had the original reconstruction and removal date to be December 2022. Okay. So I think that covers most of what I really had to say. I'm sure some people have some questions. Yes, no, please.
When you say reconstruction, you're just referring to meeting the criteria of being a foot above the water board.
Well, it's that, it's leveling the crest, it's doing some reinforcement work around the spillway and through the stone culvert underneath.
Yeah.
But yeah, so our terminology is reconstruction, but it's really a significant repair. Maybe it's a more understandable terminology. We have a repair category that doesn't require a permit as well, so we're careful in use of that word. So, but it's not like digging the whole thing out and putting it back in.
Right. If anyone's interested in based on what you observe with the bowl and is it moving or, I mean, possibly it was even built with a curvature.
I can almost guarantee you it wasn't.
Yep.
Almost every shaker style or double stone wall dyke dam in New Hampshire has a bulge around the outlet. Many of them are also tilting over.
Mm-hmm.
What's left of this one doesn't have a significant tilt. There's a little bit of an overhang for the top stones, but that's as likely to be frost action as it is to be the entire thing rotating over. But all of these have a bulge in them. Once again, some of them have tilts in them. We have had near failures of this style dam just in the past 10 years in New Hampshire. Canterbury Shaker Village had to rebuild one of their dams. They just got that done here MIT not working land right now. But we have photos of dams like this that were overtopping, and all the big holes in the top of the dam over the soil, and all the water jetting out between the stones, halfway up the dam. When that happened, all that soil is getting moved. If you move all that soil, those two stone walls aren't stable, they're not gonna hold anything back. It'll start toppling over and then releasing more water. Okay. Any other questions?
I maybe got lost fairly early on, but the two stones that you have circled on
Yes.
the top pictures, do we need to have the top of the dam go back up to that original height?
No.
Okay,
In
thank you.
fact, you don't want to. For many, many reasons, you probably wouldn't even be allowed to if it was proposed.
But we need to grade the top to make it level.
Right, what these photos don't really show is if you're standing on the pond side, looking at the downstream side of the dam, it goes like this,
Yeah,
okay?
right.
And when you've been out there, you've seen it. It's also, in the length of the dam, it's just not level, it's got a lot of undulations and everything else in it, so.
So that needs to be leveled, but not,
Level to the height it currently is on the downstream wall,
thank you.
okay?
Yeah, I think the calculation is roughly 50 cubic yards of appropriate material need to be brought in and leveled out. These are the actual plans that were submitted to the Department of Environmental Services and that have been approved by Jim and his team there, subject to approval of the final wetlands permit. So they'll just be over here if you want to take a look at them afterwards. But these are the plans that the engineer put together.
And I can hang out over there and help.
And if my memory serves right, it's about 14 inches at the dam height is kind of about where we would have a leveling effect of the dam, 14 or 15 inches,
It's between 12 and 14 inches, I think.
something like
Obviously,
that. So
it varies.
it's not a huge amount, but it's, it's like that amount that would be level all the way across.
Yeah.
We have to put
Follow up?
cement in? Are we putting cement in?
No, we put in, go ahead.
I'm gonna get back to that question. You have a follow-up?
I just wanted to follow, because Beth, I remember, or maybe I misremember, that you and I were once talking about how the top of the dam should have a way for high water to escape, so it should have a low point, or maybe I misunderstood.
No, actually, that's a good one. Early on, when we thought there would be discharge
And I
capacity.
apologize.
No, it's a good question that I glossed right over. Early on, when we thought there was not adequate discharge capacity for this dam through the main spillway,
Okay,
we were looking at alternatives for what's termed an auxiliary spillway, which is a spillway somewhere off on the side on natural ground, so that water wouldn't go over the dam. Think of it as a pressure release, valve type. And it turns out there is the remains of some kind of a channel on the right side going around the downstream of the dam. It may have been an auxiliary spillway back when the dam was taller. It would actually flow some water now, even for the design event, but it's very little. But DES decided not to count that discharge because it's not maintained as a spillway. It's all got all kinds of trees in it. Some of them are falling over. So how well it would really work in its current condition, it might or might not work to the extent we think it would. When it was modeled as a nice, clean, open channel, which it really isn't. It turns out that even ignoring that, you still, with this little bit of raising the dam, have your foot of freeboard, but the reality is you still have that low area and that flow path. So if water really, really got higher than anybody anticipates, it still has a way to go around there. It's just a matter of how efficient it would be.
but, sorry, one more question. But the spillway itself is large enough, if you will, to carry the high flow?
Yes,
Thank you.
yes it is. So you had a question about concrete, correct?
I did, I just wondered how much we're having to, deconstruct to the point of putting in masonry.
There's no plan to do that. The current plans call for some grout, which is kind of a very liquid, low strength concrete without any reinforcing steel, to be injected around the top of the concrete inlet to help stabilize it. There'll be some of that done down in the stones in the spillway and also around the stone culvert that leads out horizontal. But it's ground, it's not reinforced concrete work, there's no plan to dig anything out. Quite honestly, we're all a little concerned that if you start digging it out, well, what can of worms are you opening? And right now, this should be enough to stabilize the issues that are surrounding the spillway and that culvert going underneath. You had a question?
In the lower picture where you have the red dots on, what's the time frame? Are you gonna monitor those forever or every 5 years? Or how do they relate to the plans that you're developing possibly
Right.
to reconstruct?
The initial proposal, I believe, was annually. If we get a steady baseline for 2 or 3 years where there's just no movement, then that would probably extend it to something like 5 or even 10 years, or an extreme high water elevation, then maybe we could look at it. If they're moving, then it could be even shorter time. But once again, if they're moving after those first 2 or 3 measurements, we all are gonna have a lot more conversation.
Jim, the permits that are, you've issued a permit to construct?
We've issued a permit to reconstruct a dam. There is also, you will need a permit from Wetlands Bureau. That has been submitted, but has not been actually issued.
That's for construction, really, right?
That's correct.
Yeah, it's just for the work that will be done in
Because
Wetlands.
we're not really damaging wetlands, except for.
It's all temporary impact.
Yeah, and then the second question, at one point there was a question about the historical significance of the dam, because of the age of it.
In terms
It's
of,
over 50 years old.
in terms of wetlands permitting,
No, in terms of historical preservation.
part of the wetlands permitting process is looking at the cultural and historic situation of the dam. In this kind of a case, they may have already weighed in and said no with the proposed, they may not have. But typically, the Department of Historical Resources in New Hampshire is going to look at that wetlands application, the information provided. They're going to check through their files, and they're going to look to see if there's anything unique about this dam, if there's potentially Native American artifacts in the area, or other culturally or historic things related to the dam. If they find those, then they may have some input if we were deciding to replace this with a giant concrete dam.
Right.
They would probably have some input if they deemed this to be historical. From what I'm aware of, once again, this is a type of dam that we have hundreds of in New Hampshire. So unless there is something very specific to this site, an individual, a type of mill building, as an example, an up and down saw versus a rotary saw, then they can weigh in. But typically for a wetlands permit to reconstruct a dam, they're not going to have much to say. If you were looking at removing this dam, then they might have more to say. It would never stop a project, but it could require some archaeological evaluation or some kind of signage at the dam or in the local historical society or library or something or other with photographs and information about the dam when it was intact. Did that answer your question,
Oh,
Lauren?
yeah,
Guys, gonna let me off that easy?
They'll be back, Jim.
All right.
Okay, look, so if we're waiting for these measurements of these zones that you're taking, seeing if they're static or not, if we're with the dots.
I mean, you.
Yes, so if we're waiting for
Or
those
somebody
measurements,
might.
why, go ahead, because if those do prove, as you said, to not be in place and they're moving, why even start on anything that if we did something then, if those had proven to be moving so much that we would have to essentially rebuild, why go ahead and do anything until we know about whether or
Okay,
not they're
and that's a very, very good question. Right now, it's a belief, but it's not really based on very much information. We don't think those stones are still moving. My guess, and it's a guess, is that everything has reached an equilibrium point, and unless you raise the dam and put more water behind it, I don't know that those are moving. I think it's probably unlikely. The other flip side of that is, if they are moving, most likely the most reasonable course stones. So it wouldn't necessarily involve undoing any of the work that's currently being proposed and has been permitted.
You mean like buttress?
Yeah, buttress, yes.
The work that's being proposed will, primarily is gonna affect the overflow or the water. Will that in any way help to stabilize the Boeing situation as well?
I don't think it would have any significant effect. If it
No
does,
structural
if
impact?
it does, it's because of the grouting for the stonework
Mhm.
underneath that section. It could be that if, with all the timbers rotting out under there, that some of those stones are shifting and therefore providing less support that maybe has things bulging out.
But the
It's a relatively small area of where we're doing the work and where those timbers were compared to the area that bulged, so I'm not really sure there's a direct association. All right, somebody else? Yes, ma'am.
Did the state or did you do the work at Cummings Pond on the dam, and is that related at all, the problems to this dam?
It shares some of the same problems, yes. I didn't personally, wasn't the dam safety inspector for Cummings Pond, but they went through a very similar process. They got a routine inspection, they got a letter of deficiency, they hired an engineering consultant, they came up with what their best solution was to fix all of their issues, and they did a lot of major reconstruction.
That's what I thought.
Because there's several different structures on Cummings Pond.
It looks new. Mhm.
And they had to add discharge capacity. If you had to add discharge capacity, then that would be additional work that right now, thankfully, you don't need. All right, I'm gonna let you go.
Thank you.
Welcome back.
The other piece of this that we want to talk about here is kind of the future of what we're going to do and how we're going to kind of get organized. And it's another choice that we have as far as setting up, as we kind of alluded to, some kind of association or something to look after this over a longer period of time in the future. So I want to have Tom Breck go over that.
Great, thank you. Well, I try to flip to my slide deck here. Sandy's gonna hand out copies of the slides that I'm gonna share with you here in a moment. And I will put this up, as I said, in just a moment. I just need to exit. Come on. So again, my name is Tom Burek. I had the privilege of working with Jim at the Department of Environmental Services from 2006 to 2016 while I served as commissioner there. Prior to my time at DES and now since leaving the department, I have been practicing law with the firm of Sheehan, Finney, Bass & Green in Manchester, New Hampshire, where I do a lot of environmental and energy related work, as well as a lot of work, as it turns out, with not-for-profit organizations in various ways. And I, of course, have to put the caveat here that what I'm sharing with you is for informational purposes tonight. This isn't to provide legal advice to anybody, but just to help you understand some options that we looked at and some options that may be worth looking at down the road. The first thing that I know we're going to talk about here together shortly, Buff will lead us through a discussion of really remarkable things about this body of water, and we've already heard some from Buff just about the history, is how many of you have been involved with or know about the lake monitoring program, the volunteer lake monitoring program, VLAP program? Any of you here involved with that?
No.
No? Okay. So the Department of Environmental Services sponsors a program where they invite people who are friends of a particular water body to work with the department to annually go out and collect water quality data. Share those data with the department, and the department will then put together periodic reports about the quality of the pond and track its progress over time. And fortunately, and I'm not sure who your members are who live on the pond who've been doing this, but you have, fortunately, some volunteers who've been doing this for a period of time. The most recent report from DES is as of 2017. You can find this online. I can also get it to Sandy and he can send you out the link to it. But what it tells us is that this pond has high-quality conditions. It's considered oligotrophic, meaning that really the water quality is quite good. But the only issue you have is some algal growth due to phosphorus. Phosphorus is typically a pollutant that comes from runoff. It can come from people's septic systems. It can come from runoff off of gravel roads. It can come from animals doing their things out in the woods. So it has both natural and man-made causes. The good news is that those levels seem to be getting better. And one of the beautiful things about having tremendous water quality is that, I'm sure you all see this, you go out of the pond, it has a little bit of a brownish color to it, but you probably can see fairly far down into the pond, right? That's one of the things that probably makes it attractive to loons. So I know you have loon that are nesting out there regularly. And is anybody here the people who maintain that loon raft there? Somebody maintains a nest. Here we go. You're the volunteer. It's important to know who these people are who do these things, because this is really, this is great stuff. This tells us that this is a water body that really is a remarkable piece of water here in the state for all its 159 or so acres. You also have a public boat launch and beach, and I would argue that that's actually a really positive thing, because that tells you that there are people in the community who value this resource. This is not just sort of a few people's personal playgrounds. This is really a place that is a public resource, a resource for all to enjoy. The town of Lima, of course, has a public boat launch there, right? Have a couple questions?
Yeah, I just was wondering, can you clarify the beach part of the boat launch?
Well, maybe there isn't a beach. That may be my mistake. I know there's a boat launch there. I assume some people might go there and sort of
They
use it as a
certainly
beach.
do, I didn't know if it was.
And maybe they don't.
No, it's not
The beach
supposed
is
to be
where
a
you make-
beach.
It's not supposed to be a beach?
It used to say no swimming, but
Okay.
people do swim.
Yeah,
Fair
they
enough.
certainly
It's
do.
not supposed to be a beach.
And it's not, I'm not like calling it out to say I can't believe people are swimming there, but I just know that there's a difference between the boat launch and a beach, right? They're
Got it.
supposed to be two different things, like there's a no swimming, there was a no swimming sign.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. That's helpful for me to understand. The other thing that we've all been talking about is you've got a 120-year-old. I may not have technically described this quite right, Jim, but you have a 120-year-old dam. It's not a 200-year-old dam like some of the dams in the state or older, but it's still, even though there may be a few hundred of them in the state, it is a beautiful thing to behold. So again, just quickly to summarize where we are with the process that the trust undertook. I hope you all will appreciate that the trust, when it first received this letter from the state, took it very, very seriously, which I think is probably why I got the call from Sandy saying, Tom, we have this letter, what do we do? And we sat down and we looked at it, and clearly there are two options, as Jim said. This dam could be rehabilitated or it could be removed. But the trust has really not given serious consideration to the possibility of removal. Their focus really has been on understanding what it would take to be able to rehabilitate this dam if there's a way to do that in a manner that can work for everybody. So as both Buff and Jim have indicated, we hired a surveyor, had a complete survey done of the entire area of the dam itself. On both sides of the dam, you'll see basically the base of that survey reflected in the plans that I just showed you that you can look at further afterwards. Hired a very experienced engineer to look at the dam and help develop plans, and also hired a wetland scientist to delineate the wetland areas and to prepare an application to the Wetlands Bureau to enable the work to be done in coordination with the actual application itself that had been prepared and submitted by the engineer. So where we stand right now is the application for the dam repair has been submitted, and it essentially covers, as Jim indicated, bringing about 50 cubic yards of soil in to level off the top of the dam, as well as doing repairs on the spillway area itself with grouting, and also putting in a log boom out in the front of the spillway area to prevent things from coming in and getting caught in the spillway I think I was there at one point, and there was actually a tree, portion of a tree stuck in the spillway, which was not something you want to have happen. So those are the principal components of the work that would be done. Based on the initial, and by the way, there is a wetlands permit that is in review. They asked for some additional information recently that I believe has just been submitted. We're hopeful that that permit will be issued sometime in the next few months. And once that permit has been issued, then I think Jim turns around and issues another letter saying, you now have your complete permit, you can go forward. Once we have that complete package, we would be in a position to take this project out for actual bids if we chose to do so, when we choose to do so. Having said that, once we have that initial plan and approval from DES, we contacted some contractors who have experience doing this kind of work and asked them if they would give us some preliminary cost estimates, not binding, these aren't bids, but just give us a sense of what are we up against here? What could this cost? And we got quite a range, as you might see. One of the contractors told us this project would probably cost somewhere between $155,000 and $170,000. The other gave us a number of $375,000 to $445,000. You could say, were they looking at the same project? We know that they both actually had people go up and look at the site. So we know they looked at the same site, but they may have had very different expectations. One of these was by a contractor that does a range of different kinds of work, highways, but also, and roads, bridges, and that kind of thing, but also has real experience doing work on smaller dams in New Hampshire. The other is from a highly specialized environmental contractor that does a lot of site rehabilitation type work, including wetlands improvements and that kind of thing. So again, we don't know for sure what this is going to cost. Our best guess is it could be somewhere in between these two numbers, but until we actually get firm bids, we wouldn't know. But this is probably a pretty good indicator of the range that we could be looking at. And as a consequence of that, as Buff suggested, we think it's really important that as a community, folks really start coming together and exploring what all the options might be. I should tell you that we looked at the state statute that would allow one to form what's called a village district. There are a lot of village districts in New Hampshire, for example, for water supplies or wastewater treatment systems that are within an individual town. Turns out the way the state statute is written, we couldn't do a village district here because, as you all know, the town line goes right out in the middle of the pond, and so we've got about half of the residents, actually probably less than half in Dorchester, more than half in Lyme, and you would need to have them all in the same town, and you would need to have a certain number of folks who live there year-round or are taxpayers in the town to actually be able to form and operate a village district. So we don't think that would be a viable option. I'm sure somebody would ask, well, can't we get somebody just to take this over for us? I can tell you that the state of New Hampshire owns as many dams as it does because the legislature at one time was very favorably inclined to just say, yeah, we'll take that dam on. And that's before they realized that we suspect how much these things cost to keep up. Because the state itself is actually the largest single owner of dams in the state, right, Jim?
Correct, yeah, the state owns about 250 dams.
Yeah. But I think it's also fair to say that there's not much appetite these days on the part of the legislature for taking on ownership of new dams, and in order to do that, you actually need an act of the legislature signed by the governor to do that. So yeah, I suppose it could be an option, but in all candor, it's not an option that the trust at this point has considered seriously. You might ask, well, are there grants or loans available out there to fund this kind of work? The short answer is, as a general matter, no, not for low hazard dams, but there are some instances where state funds, for example, through the Land and Community Heritage Investment Program, or LCHIP, have been given as grants to projects to help them do dam rehabilitation. For example, I think the dam, Jim, that you were talking about, Canterbury Shaker Village Dam, I believe they received an LCHIP grant. Now, that was a dam built in 1817, probably extensive documentation on its historical significance. There may be some distinguishing features there, but the point is that there are certain kinds of organizations that may be eligible for grants. So what this really comes down to from the perspective of the trust is the trust wants to do the right thing here, but also the trust is looking at this and listening to what Jim has told us about additional issues that may be down the road if it turns out that bulge is still moving. The realization that the trust is probably not the right instrument, the right entity to be responsible for handling this in the long term. And so the question is, are there other options? What might be another or other alternative ownership options and options for ensuring the long-term repair, reconstruction, maintenance, and monitoring of the dam? So what Sandy asked me to look at was what else could we do to help? Are there other options available? And what I want to do is just share with you one option. This is just something to consider. There are going to be pros and cons to any option, but this is one that we've talked about a lot within the smaller group of folks who've been involved and thought there would be value in sharing with all of you tonight. The thought is to look at the possibility of forming a what you might call a pond protective association or a friends association. It would be formed as a not-for-profit organization under New Hampshire state law, and ideally, we would be able to secure a tax exemption under the Internal Revenue Code as what's known as a 501c3 organization. And what this would allow us to do, if we were successful in all of that, would be to provide a support structure for all of the stewardship efforts that go on the pond, with the understanding that this is for the overall public benefit. It is not just to benefit the folks who happen to own property around the pond, but really this is because folks around the pond recognize, and others who love this pond recognize that there's real value in bringing people together to ensure that folks are working together to keep this as a place for people to enjoy from generation to generation. So certainly something like this could foster and enhance the community spirit and engagement that you all are showing and demonstrating here, being here tonight. It would also be eligible to apply for and to accept grants, for example, whether it's for the dam or to help with monitoring water quality or to help with improving conditions, for example, at a boat launch, or helping with monitoring of and making a great home for loons, helping with the fishery, whatever it might be, helping landowners to figure out how they can better manage runoff from their lands to help protect water quality. Those are all grant types that are out there that an organization like this could be eligible for. If it is a 501c3 and you itemize your tax deductions, you could itemize a contribution to the organization. With respect to the dam itself, one of the things that an organization like this could do is it could potentially accept a gift from this trust of the dam and associated properties, which could be put into a conservation easement and held by an organization like this in perpetuity for its protection and preservation and maintenance for the benefit of all. And in that connection, if it were to own the dam, it could also accept tax deductible gifts to cover the cost of rehabilitating the dam in the near term and future efforts that may be necessary to keep it up and in the condition that everybody wants it to be in. The basic process for creating an organization of this kind is you form a nonprofit organization under New Hampshire law. You need 5 board members who are unrelated to serve on that. Once you've done that, you then would apply for a tax exemption under the Internal Revenue Code. The first step can be done very quickly if you have all the people who want to and are willing to be involved. The second, it can take the IRS some time to review those applications, months sometimes. And once you have an organization in place, your board of directors meets periodically, has to fulfill certain fiduciary duties. You file annually with the state of New Hampshire, with the Internal Revenue Service annual returns or tax returns, and you need to demonstrate that you in fact have public support. That is, there's effectively a public support test you have to meet, showing that you are receiving income not just from 1 or 2 people, but from the general public as a significant enough portion of your revenues, so that the IRS says, yes, you really are a charity. You're not somebody's special private fund. So that's the basics of setting up an organization like this. That, as I said, could be one way of helping the community to come together and for the long term, help to ensure the protection of the pond that you love, and a way of maintaining and securing the future of the dam that makes the pond, at least as you know it today, the pond that you will have for the foreseeable future. That's what I had to share, Buff. I'm happy to take any questions.
Fire off a question.
Please.
The cost estimate that you had, was that based on those set of drawings, or was that prior to?
No, that is based on the set of drawings that has been preliminarily approved by Jim Weber's group at the Department of Environmental Services.
It's a wide range.
It is
Or
a wide
specific
range.
scope.
It is a wide range. Obviously, we'd like to believe that lower range cost estimate of 155 to 170,000 is closer to where it would ultimately come out. But it's just important to recognize that the review that they did was a fairly cursory review. They didn't take a lot of time to do it, not the level of effort that a contractor would put into a full bid analysis. So that's really the best I can tell you about that at this point.
Thanks.
Yeah, please.
You threw out a comment that the trust was not the right organization. You didn't think to be involved with this. Why not?
Why not? Because, well, for a couple of reasons. One, the mere fact that we have to have this meeting here tonight, I hope helps folks to understand that the trust financially is just not going to be in a position to be able to bear all of this. The trust, if nothing else, if nothing comes of these discussions among all of us tonight, the trust for sure will be contacting each of you individually and asking if you would voluntarily contribute something toward the cost of the work. But the trust's larger, the near-term costs are certainly daunting, but the trust's larger concern is for the long-term future of this dam. That is, there are a lot of people who depend upon this, and ensuring that there's a community of interest around making sure that people are really keeping an eye on this and making sure that that the community is ready for even the next steps that could come beyond this. For example, as Jim was saying, there may be a need to buttress the front of the dam, and that would, I don't know how to even put a cost estimate on that. I don't know, Jim, if you have any sense of ballparking that, but I wouldn't be surprised if that were easily another, $50,000 to $100,000 or more, but I don't know.
My guess is that you'd be looking at roughly doubling that initial cost estimate. You have to extend your culvert out, you have to provide some drainage and collection systems involved so that you can monitor seepage and any movement of water. So, yeah, I think the general ballpark would be comparable to whatever your first cost estimate award would be. So, roughly 2 times.
So this is why I'm suggesting that a single private owner is probably not in anybody's best interest long term. If that single private owner had infinite resources and were willing to do this for everybody's benefit, then probably so. But the reality here is that that's just not going to be possible. And so the trust has spent considerable sums to get us to this point, so that we all will be in a position to be able to make some informed decisions. But this isn't something the trust is going to be able to bear on its own. And then that's why it's really important that we have a conversation as a community about what we can do.
Tom, how many other dams or, some kind of protective association or friends association are there in New Hampshire that have successfully done this? And what's their track record? Are there other examples of people that have taken over the dams as a community and set up a 501(c)(3) and successfully done this?
Yes.
We can't be the first person in the
No.
state to do that.
Unfortunately, this is a fairly common situation. There are numerous, probably even up to 100, if not more, associations, LLCs in some variety, that own dams. There are probably 40 or 45 village districts that were formed to own a dam, specifically. There's one case in Wyndham, it's called Methyl Pond. It was actually in the news over the past several years, several times, because they had to go from forming an association to take over the dam, to then working with the town to be able to accept certain kinds of grants that were only available to municipalities, and having a big agreement. That dam was almost completed reconstruction, and when it's complete, then they're gonna have a village district, and everybody in the village district's gonna take it over. So this stuff definitely happens, and there are a lot of LLCs out there. Yes?
Yeah, a couple questions. How many of these associations have successfully qualified as 501c3 corporations? You know?
It's not something we're typically involved with on our side, but based off my conversations from the reps during inspections, I think that they all have. Or the great majority of them. All, I should never say.
It's a very good question. I have been trying to get my arms around this, and the truth is, I don't know for sure what the answer is to that. There are a few that have, and they may or may not be 501c3s. I spoke earlier about the Canterbury Shaker Village. That is definitely a 501c3. Now, it's not, its membership does not consist of the folks who own properties around the pond, but that is a 501c3. Clearly, it has a mission that's much broader than just that dam. Some of these, I should say that a very large percentage of the water bodies around the state, lakes and ponds around the state, have lake associations or pond associations of some kind. Their corporate structures vary widely. I think some of them are 501c3s, some may be 501c4s, which is a tax exempt but organization, but you can't get a tax deduction for making a contribution to it. And there may be some that are basically unincorporated, or they're incorporated as state organizations, but they don't have any tax status with the IRS. So there's a wide variety out there.
And one other somewhat related question. How often, I'm recognizing that towns, we form part of the tax base in the towns. How often do the towns actually contribute to the maintenance of the dam?
I would say that's rare. It does happen on occasion. If you go back 50 years, towns would often acquire dams. This is the kind of situation. There's actually a whole set of law about that, and the laws and regulations that govern dams in New Hampshire. But in recent times, I'm not aware of that happening. Most of the towns, especially if they already own a dam, they understand the liability aspect, and most of them just aren't interested in it.
I'm not suggesting ownership, I'm suggesting contributing to the maintenance of the dam, because that keeps the tax base up, right? That dam.
Well, it's a good argument. I like it. I'm only aware of one, and it's one that the town has a history of involvement, because the town built a road over a dam, and the town owns a significant, like 40% of the land around the pond. They have contributed a small amount of money towards the work that's about to go on, but it was a fight. And I think the only reason that they were successful in getting that, the association of the dam, is because they didn't have that historic record of where it had been done in the past. And it could also, in that case, be pretty easy to point the finger to the road that caused the problem in the dam.
Thanks.
The dam's in Dorchester, and nobody in Dorchester accesses our pond, so they wouldn't.
But Lyme benefits from it.
Yeah, mine does.
Other questions at this point?
I have a question. I'm not sure who's the right person to answer, but what are the chances that the wetland permit is denied?
I think it's highly unlikely the wetland permit would be denied. This is a fairly routine kind of permit. It's what's called, I think, a minimal impact permit, or the equivalent thereof. The basic elements of the permit involve putting a temporary coffer dam which is essentially a dam to lower the water level. It would be made of sandbags, putting it basically into the pond itself, just above the spillway area, so that they can then pump the water out from that area to lower the water level enough in front of the spillway to be able to do all the work they need to do on the spillway. That would just be temporary, and then there's some piping for the siphons or the pumps that they would need to pump the water up over the dam, and then have an area, again, cordoned off of what they call silt socks probably, or something else, where the water would flow in and effectively be filtered before it then discharged back into the main stream below the dam. So all of those impacts are temporary impacts. They call it a permanent impact, but really the only permanent impact to the stream is where new concrete is essentially going to be put on the face of the spillway itself. So we expect the permit will be approved. It's just a matter of additional details that the department asked for.
The wetlands rules changed recently, and so I don't know if I think yours is under the old rules.
No, it's actually under the new rules.
Anyway.
Which is one of the reasons why it's just taking a little longer, because everybody's still trying to figure out exactly what's required.
Exactly, they are. But I would agree that for reconstruction of a dam, I'm not aware of any wetlands permit ever having been denied. There's a public safety component, which sometimes changes their viewpoint a little bit. Then there's a case where there's not a public safety component.
So the permit's good for 2 years?
The dam reconstruction permit is good for 2 years, but you can request and extend it for 2 years without a problem. The wetlands permit is good for 5 years.
And can also be extended for an additional 5 years upon request, if you request before the first 5-year term ends. Other questions at this moment? One or two more? Yep.
How long does it take to create a 501c3 corporation, and what are the legal costs, or in terms of just doing that? Because that would, I guess in my mind, be in addition to the dam costs.
Sure. The basic filing fee with the state of New Hampshire is something like $25. The application fee to the IRS, I believe, is something like $600. I think I could probably speak for the trust in saying that those are costs that the trust would seriously consider expending on behalf of the community to help move this to that kind of an approach. And we've already looked closely at a lot of these details, so actually a lot of the work has already been done.
So Tom, the trust files for the 501c3, how does this work?
No, the trust doesn't file. What happens is that we would get at least 5 incorporators, that is individuals, who sign the papers of incorporation, and those get filed with the Secretary of State's office, officially forming the corporation. And then you have to have 5 folks at least who are unrelated, who agree to serve as your initial board of directors. And that initial board of directors then comes together, adopts bylaws, and would make a decision as to whether or not to apply for 501c3 status. As I've indicated, I think the trust would be helpful in putting that together. That application then gets filed. I'm going to venture to guess that right now it's probably anywhere from 3 to 9 months before the IRS turns around and makes a final decision on one of those 501c3 application. It's a fairly extensive application, but so that you asked what's the entire length of the process. It could be anywhere, this is just ballparking, anywhere from 6 to 12 months to go through all of that. But the actual formation of the organization itself can be quite quick. And assuming that you get your 501c3 exemption issued, the effective date of the exemption goes back to the date of incorporation. So it's retroactive to the date that the organization was formed. So it's possible to do these things on parallel tracks, that is to form the organization, start a discussion about, okay, how could we go about figuring out what it's really going to cost, figuring out how those funds might be raised, And I'd like to believe, and Jim, maybe you can speak to this, that if the department were to see good faith efforts on the part of the community to figure out a path forward, that there may be some ability to talk about a little bit of extension. Is that possible?
That's very true. As long as there's forward progress, and it's being made, and we're in a communication loop on that, then we are normally very willing to work with the dam owner to sort these things out. I'll be quite honest, I've just this year finished 4 projects that have been in the works for 10 to 15 years each. Some of these things just take time. But those are municipalities that have their own different level of budgeting challenges and other things because they only do it once a year. But yes, we would definitely work with extending some of those dates.
You had a question as well, Ken?
Yeah, I would just say, about a 501(c)(3),
Yeah.
that I'm involved with an organization that didn't own anything to speak of, and it was really no problem. Now we own a building, we have extensive filing, it's not an easy filing, you need a treasurer, you need a secretary, we have to send out 1099 forms to every single person who works on the dam and that we pay anything to. It's a lot of work, and you're involved with the state and the federal governments, and I would suggest that all avenues for a more voluntary or non-legal type organization should be explored. It's a lot of work, you have to find people, it's a lot of paperwork,
You are absolutely right. It takes real commitment to do it.
I mean, if you own it, if it owns the dam,
Yes, well,
particularly.
any 501(c)(3) requires a level of commitment from a set of officers, and ideally from its members. And if this were to be formed as an organization, one would like to think that everybody who has property around the pond would get involved, but that you might be able to engage others who just love the pond and enjoy going out there to swim, fish, boat, whatever it might be. But still, it's a challenge. You have to have people who are willing and able to invest time. No question about it. I will. One more question, and then I know Buff wants to have us actually introduce ourselves to each other, because we haven't done yet.
Yeah, just to follow up on what you said about the application for the 501(c)(3), if we went that route, if it's approved, your contributions this year are deductible this year.
That your contributions would be deductible in the year in which
You wouldn't have to wait till next year to get that.
I think that's right. Yeah, I think that's right, because again, the effective date of the exemption goes back to the date of incorporation. So if it were incorporated this year, a gift were made this year, the exemption were granted, you could take it as a deduction this year. Okay, let me thank you all very much for that opportunity to share those thoughts. I'll turn things back to.
So obviously tonight, we're not making any decisions. This is an information session, and we're just trying to get as much information in everybody's hands, and there'll probably be a lot of other questions later on, which you can email to answer. One thing I wanted to do was just to sort of get a feel, going around the room just quickly, not spending a lot of time because dinner's coming up, on people's history at Reservoir Pond. I go back to 1957 when the Cutters bought the Richardson camp, now owned by Ryan McCool recently, new member, new neighbor here, so she said hi to Ryan. His wife is tending the kids, Celeste, so anyway, new neighbors. So I go back to 1957, and then kind of spent a lot of time up there because neighbors around where I lived in Hanover, 3 of them had camps up there, the McNairs, the Cutters, Stones, and another friend of mine, the Thompsons, all had camps there. So as kids, we caused a lot of problems on the pond. And we had a great time, and kind of brought back a lot of memories. As I got older, I kind of had a fortunate opportunity, and I brought this because I don't know how many people have seen it and you can pass it around, but being in the real estate business, I was contacted by a development group in Texas that was gonna put 21 lots in a Reservoir Pond in 1981. And the Texans came up and they had to go through the Upper Valley Lake Sunapee Planning Commission in order to start this process. And I was sitting there with Paul Lalor, who was, he was the land manager for IP, for International Paper, who owned the land. And the hearing didn't go quite as the Texans thought. And they came out and they had their little suits on and everything, and they said, they don't like us up here. And so Paul turns to me and he says, oh my God, I've already booked, this is November in 1981. He says, oh my God, I've already booked this thing as being sold. He says, you know anybody else want to buy it? I said, yeah, I'll buy it. I don't have any money, but I'll buy it. He goes, I don't care. He says, I'll loan you the money. So he loans me the money, and I had 2 years to come up with the money. So that was, at that time, I sold the lot to the Halls, who lived down in Hartford, and then they sold it to the trust, or to Allison. And so that was the parcel that I sold off in order to afford to try and protect the rest of the land there. And then I tracked down another parcel on the other side. So I've spent a lot of time in trying to protect the pond. I've spent a lot of resources up there. And obviously, I don't want to see the dam breached. And so from a personal perspective, I would like to see if we can kind of form some kind of friends of the pond or something. I think Jane's idea of trying to keep it simple might be something that we want to look at. You can form an LLC and keep it very simple if you wanted to, and not go through the 501(c)(3). Depends on what everybody's interest is on deductions and things like that. But we all, you know, if you had a hole in your roof, you'd fix it, and if but if we have a hole in the pond, we gotta fix it. So I just thought if we could go around quickly and just sort of say who you are, because I don't think everybody knows everybody, quickly, and tell just a story, that would be great. So maybe Jason.
Yeah, sure. I'm Jason Ruler. I'm going to take off my mask so you can recognize me without it. But, I don't know how long we've been up there. You probably know better than I do. My parents, Jack and Diana Ruler, lived there as well. I live in the camp that my grandfather owned, 57, 58. It was built in 53 or 54, and I think my grandfather had it after that. So as a kid, did a lot of snowmobiling up there with Chet Stone, Wayne Pike, Thompson's. Been there since, so in and out.
Good.
But I cherish the place. We wouldn't be there if it wasn't for the pond. So I'm all in for what we got to do to maintain it the way it is. So.
Katie?
Sorry, I'm Katie Little. I'm the one who goes out kayaking most days on the pond in that red and yellow kayak. I've been there since 1991, and just like the pond because of its water and its water quality, I guess is what it boils down to.
Jane?
I'm Jane Fan. I've only been there since '02, newcomer. I moved up from the south so I wouldn't have to be hot anymore. And I guess that's about it. I thought as I remembered the house, I thought, well, it's on it's close to Lyme on a flat road. And so when I came to move in, I thought, what? What have I done?
Tom?
Well, we were the new folks on the pond. Thank you.
What are your names?
I'm Tom Owen.
Donna Wallace.
I actually grew up down the road just a few miles. Was there since '77. Pond was always a getaway place for me, kind of a quiet place to escape to as a teenager. Didn't live on it until, we still don't, but our goal is to live there someday soon. And we're improving the property we bought every chance we get.
Yeah, so we have the Wilcox property with the porta potty, so we can't miss it.
And a really cool shed, which
And a
was
really
our
good
first
shed.
permit.
It's a love shack.
The house is coming
Love shack,
next.
coming in.
Ryan?
Yeah, so I'm Ryan McCool, and my wife is Celeste. We have 2 kids who are, you've probably heard, they're 4 and 7. But we moved to the area in the Upper Valley actually in 2011, and quickly became friends with the McLaurs and the Becks, and so that's how we were introduced to the pond. So we've been spending time out there for a while, 9 years or so, and have the whole time been just totally in love with the place and looking for any opportunity possible to get a spot on it. So when we found out the Cutters were selling, we really jumped right on it, and so that's our story. We also have a house here in Lyme, but we love spending time in the pond, and we're very eager to help with keeping it, preserving it as it is, and maintaining it. So.
Rick, you wanna throw something in?
I pretty much grew up in town in the lower part of the valley there, spent a lot of time up there when I was a kid. So kind of always been around up there long ago, not so much recently, but yeah.
Tim, Margaret?
Margaret, go ahead.
Let's see, like I grew up in Hanover as a local kid, so spent time in the late 60s, early 70s in the cabin that we actually own now. Partying with high school friends and having a great time with the Johnsons, who were good friends of ours as I grew up. And then when we moved to Lyme, we started taking our kids up there and kayaking and canoeing on the pond and swimming around and sort of crossing our fingers that something would come up. And a good friend of ours owned or was caretaking for the Johnsons, so luck would have it, and we've been there for 15 years now. So, and very slowly improving, getting ourselves moved in there, but we really, really cherish the place in such a huge way.
Looks great from the water.
Oh, thanks. Come on over.
Yeah.
Tim?
Yeah, so I'm Tim Beck, and my wife's Wendy, and we have 3 kids and several grandchildren now, and you've probably heard the grandchildren more recently because we've been taking care of them. But we used to go up to St. Nice's camp in high school and with the Thompsons and caused a little bit of rocky summer pond, but that's how we fell in love with it as well. And then we rented the McNair's camp when my kids were young. And then Buck had an option with Harry, and Buck and I went to high school together in Hanover. And so we ended up purchasing it through the Hampshire Charitable Trust, I think it was, 2011, maybe. Yeah, so we've been pretty much spending every summer up there since then, and the septic system in, improving it as we go. So love the place, and it's pretty dear to not only my wife and me, but also the next generation, which is really kind of coming to fruition here pretty quickly.
All right, well, I think there's a lot to think about. I don't know, Sandy, if you want to say a last word or anything.
Sure.
But, I think that
Say my name.
Carter.
Hi guys, I'm Carter.
Sorry.
Yep, no worries. I grew up on the pond every summer. That was our summer place. Lived just down the road on 420 Dorchester Road the rest of the year. But my mother, it was her favorite place in the entire world. The home that's there now is so close to my heart. It's her monument. I feel like a really big piece of her is still there. I look forward every year to coming back. It's the most magical spiritual place I think that exists, and I feel like that we all feel that, and there's no way that we can let it turn into a puddle, and I love that place more than anything.
Nice.
Well, thank you everybody for coming. It's definitely a challenge, what we've got in front of us, but there's a lot, sounds like there's a lot of community support, a lot of love for the place. I come up there every once in a while, and I love it too. This was an idea session, and there's no absolute path going forward. We're hoping that the community can get together and come up with some suggestions. This is just one. If it's the one that we get enough people backing, then we'll go for it. If there's another path forward, that's great. We wanted to get everybody in one spot. We videotaped it for people who couldn't be here. We got the state who kind of got the ball rolling on all this. And so I'm available for questions at any point in time. I'd love if we can get this tied up and move on with other things in my life. That's all I have to say. Jason?
So I just, I think to start off with, if we can get some of the information that we've heard, if we can get, a copy of that or electronically or whatever to start with, I think that would be great.
We're going to be an open book, transparent.
I didn't know your trust owned the parcel near it or on it, or is it, or?
Yep.
So I didn't know all of that, so that's really nice to know. And
so the piece of land.
I would like to look at the plans some more, and we just want to be involved, but I need the information, not only for me, but for my parents who couldn't be here as well.
Sure. We've done a heck of a lot of work to comply with what the state mandated that we needed to do.
Yeah.
All of that will be available here tonight, and as we move forward, we're going to share everything.
Okay, great.
So if it's not here tonight, you can ask for it, and we will provide it.
Excellent.
Thanks, Sandy.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Sandy.
Really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great.
Well, great. I'd like to hear that. I think that's it. I will stay around to answer any questions you have. I think that Jim and Tom will also. You can look over the engineering maps that we have, and any questions that you have, we're happy to help with. Great. Thanks, Uncle.
Thanks to Buff too for the
Yeah.
historic.
Yes.
I love that
And
stuff.
also thank you to the Dowds who
Yeah.
graciously allowed us to meet here. No expense for that. Maybe something for the coffee, but we'll take care of that.
That's okay.
Okay.
Thanks, Andy.
Meeting adjourned.
Yeah.